Okay, folks, you might know that it is Stan Lee's 100th birthday, had he lived, of course, and not necessarily in honor of him. It just happens to be good timing. I was planning on reading this anyway. I'm going through Stan Lee's Just Imagine Stan Lee creating the DC Universe omnibus. Now, this might not be something you've ever heard of. It is a limited set of comics, about 12 in all, oversized comics, in which Stan Lee was given the task of writing for the main concept characters of the DC universe. Now, Stan Lee did Marvel. Marvel involved Spider-Man, Hulk, the Avengers, Captain America, X-Men. That's Marvel's side. Now, DC, of course, is the side that's got Justice League, Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, etc. And at some point in the past, they got the idea of, well, why don't we just basically say, okay, Stan, you're the preeminent Marvel writer. Why don't you take on these concepts of Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Green Lantern, The Flash, Aquaman? Put your own spin on them. You know, it doesn't have to have anything else to do with the DC universe at hand. You can use whatever characters you want, modify them in whichever way you want, but they don't have to have any relation whatsoever to the original idea of the DC universe. Just go all out, do what you want. And Stan Lee, of course, is a man of vast imagination, and he came up with various concepts, some of which seem to tie back to his heyday of the original Marvel Universe. For example, his Batman is a guy who made millions as a pro wrestler after having gone to jail for a while. And basically bulked up, and then he came out of jail and realized he'd be, in his fit shape, he'd be great as a pro wrestler. He designed a bat suit as a gimmick, and he went into the pro wrestling circuit. That actually harkens back to Spider-Man's origin. And if you've seen the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie, you know that Peter Parker's debut as Spider-Man was actually in a pro wrestling challenge where he took down a pro wrestler. Now, in the actual Marvel Universe, Spider-Man was going to continue on as a pro wrestler and as a celebrity with his powers until he messed up and his Uncle Ben got killed on account of him. So that's when he learns that with great power there must also come great responsibility, and so on and so forth. Now, the character in Stan Lee's Batman, Wayne Williams, is a down-and-out kid who's father, I think, was a police officer who was gunned down on the line of duty. Wayne himself is framed for a crime, which is why he goes to jail, and then he winds up bulking up to the extreme, also bulking up his mind by reading just about everything there is to read in the prison library, and then he hooks up with a scientist who's also on the inside due to corruption or tax evasion or something like that, and he gets the scientist to come work for him and design things for his bat suit, and then he becomes a crime fighter himself as Batman. So you get to see little parallels between the various things that Stan Lee's done. But the point being is that here you have a Batman created by Stan Lee that really only ever saw the light of day in that one particular issue. It's just that in this particular week's new releases of comics, you'll see a Tales from Earth 6, which is the Stan Lee it is the Stan Lee created characters. DC is actually publishing a volume that contains tales continuing these characters' stories. And I can't help but read through these stories, which for me it's really the first time. I'm reading through these stories for the first time, and one of the things that is echoing in my mind is what Eric July has been talking about with regard to multiverses. When the DC created the idea of the multiverse, the reason it was created was to handle all of the continuity discrepancies that had crept into DC on account of their having a golden age and a silver age. For example, we know that in the Silver Age Flash, Barry Allen, his origin, he got the idea of becoming the Flash from the comic books that he read as a child, which recounted the tales of the Golden Age Flash, who was Jay Garrick. Except the Golden Age Flash didn't actually exist. The Golden Age Flash was actually somebody in an alternate reality, and who knows if there was some kind of idea about tapping into the fact that there was this parallel reality where all this stuff was happening. The comic book writer just happened to realize and put down on paper the exploits of this Flash that was actually in another universe, or whether it was just, a coincidence of imagination. But in any case, the reason the multiverse was created is because Carmine Infantino famously drew a cover for Julius Schwartz to fill out. This was kind of the way that they would do things in the day, and I found this out from Carmine Infantino himself, that he would draw these cliffhanger type covers. And these cliffhanger type covers, sometimes it would be like Flash being strapped to a giant boomerang about to be fired off into space, would be something where then Julie Schwartz would have to come in and plot what actually was going on and write what actually was going on. And then Carmine Infantino would draw it from there. But some of these original issues were Carmine Infantino's original ideas. And The Flash of Two Worlds, which was the famous issue that established the multiverse, was one of those issues. He said, well, let me see if Julie can get out of this one. And so he drew Jay Garrick and Barry Allen both running to save the same person. And so that is when Julius Schwartz came up with the idea of a multiverse, the idea that there existed multiple universes that existed on different frequencies, and the Flash, being a super speedster, could attune himself to the frequency of a multiverse world and travel across the multiversal barrier to that world. And that was how they got around the fact that DC for a long time had these two Flashes, two Green Lanterns, two sets of Hawkman and Hawkgirl. You had all of these different kinds of Golden Age versions and Silver Age versions. So you just had Earth 1 for the Silver Age and Earth 2 for the Golden Age. And that worked out well for a while until DC just expanded that out the wazoo, and they said, okay, well, let's try and collapse this all down to one timeline. They came up with Crisis on Infinite Earths, and the rest is jumbled history. But in any case, that was the original idea behind the multiverse on the DC side. It was to enable DC to take advantage of the fact that they had a very, very long-standing continuity that they had to kind of separate into two different ages, the Golden Age and the Silver Age, so that they didn't occupy the same kind of timeline, because that would have made things impossible, and plus it didn't give them any opportunities to cross over. So that was the original function of the multiverse. But what the multiverse had spiraled out of control into was just a way to take ideas and give them the same names. And this is basically what Eric July has been arguing. You basically take the Batman idea and tweak it a little bit, and you put it in a multiverse, another universe aside from the main one. And instead of letting it be a character that stands on its own, you instead give it this little, tangential existence, and then people either do or don't care about it altogether. It doesn't really become something that can stand on its own 2 feet, because it's always derivative off of the main universe. And I'm seeing that so much in this Just Imagine Stan Lee creating the DC universe, because why is it that the concept that he has of a guy who came from a world where the gravity was 1,000 times stronger than that of Earth, and where they had technology that allows him to fly, and that he was a super cop over there, or just he was one of a police squad force over there, and then he winds up, after his wife is killed by a strong guy nemesis, comes to Earth through a dimensional barrier and then lands on Earth and becomes a circus performer, which I think is something that the Hulk wound up doing for a while. So there we go, a little bit of traveling back to reach back into the old bag of tricks. But you could have had this character exist as a legit character in its own right without having to call him Superman, without having to give him an agent named Lois Lane, who basically would work with him to broker deals with various entertainment industries. You wouldn't have things like, you've got a Wonder Woman there who is like Maria Mendoza, who is the and yet you've also got a Diana Prince in that same universe, who is an archaeologist who deals with the same artifact, kind of artifacts that gives Maria Mendoza her power. All of these, all of these characters that are derivative from the DC characters could have existed as just characters in their own right. But because they are attached to the names of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, they just exist as these pale reflections instead. And so I really think Eric July has been on to something about the fact that by marketing this whole multiverse idea out the wazoo, which Marvel has increasingly done, ever since the whole Earth 616 stuff, and then the Ultimate Universe, and then lining up with Secret Wars to basically try and collapse things down, but then expand stuff out again. You see both of the big two companies taking their characters and just diluting them out over these multiverses. But which are the main characters that actually matter? You know, you would think that it would be just the ones in the main timeline. But after a while, you get to the point where you think, do I really care about any of these characters? Can any of these characters really be said to be the real characters, given how many times even the real characters have had their histories reset, have had facts about them reset? You know, here we have Superman with parents alive, Superman with parents dead, Superman with parents alive again. Okay, now it's just his mom that's alive, Martha Kent, who's alive, and then now both parents are alive again. It just, you don't know who you're dealing with. And eventually you get to the point where you realize you're not dealing with anyone. This can't even be believed to be a person, to be a character. I once wrote a Quora post a while back, and the question was asked, why, how is DC different from Marvel, and how are they failing? And I put it like this. I said DC and Marvel are both failing in different ways. Marvel is failing because they have never had a universal reset, where such that they have all of this baggage that every one of their characters carries, and they allow things to change in the Marvel universe, but not so far as that it can't someday go right back to the original story. For example, they had the Superior Spider-Man story, where Dr. Octopus inhabited Spider-Man's body for a while and began to do things as Spider-Man. He wanted to be a better hero than Spider-Man ever was. And that would have been a fascinating concept to me, were it not for the fact that even in the earliest of that run, you got the idea that someday Peter Parker was going to be back. So they already planted the seeds of Peter Parker's return in like the very first issue of Superior Spider-Man, so that they were already telling you, don't get attached. Don't get attached to this version of Spider-Man that we're putting out there, because we will eventually drag him back to being who he was. And they will never leave those concepts anywhere outside of their original space for very long. You're always going to go back to a Fantastic Four that involves Reed, Sue, Ben, and Johnny, even if the whole constitution of the team should change at some point. I know that at one point they had a really great diversion where Ben and Johnny were still on the team, and then you had a Ms. Marvel, and you had somebody else who was the fourth member of the Fantastic Four. I can't remember who. And that was actually a pretty interesting thing, because Reed and Sue had just decided to leave altogether. They just flat quit and left everything in Ben and Johnny's hands. And that was a pretty good run. But did it last? No, of course not. It never lasts. And that's the problem with Marvel, is that any innovative or new thing that they do will never last. They will always bring things back to where it was. Doesn't matter if they age Captain America and make Sam Wilson the Falcon. Make Sam Wilson the Falcon into Captain America after him. They're eventually going to bring Captain America back. Doesn't matter if the Hulk, they split off Banner from the Hulk, and then they give the power of Banner to the Amadeus Cho, who became the totally awesome Hulk for a while. They're always going to bring Bruce Banner back as the Hulk, and it's just without fail. They changed Thor for a while, and they bring him back. They changed Iron Man for a while, and they bring him back. They're so stuck, and what it relates to is the problem that brings upon the characters is that they're carrying so much ridiculous amounts of baggage on them that you think there's too much history here, and we need some sort of plate clearing, where we can just basically wipe the slate clean and let people come in again at the ground floor, which is what the Ultimate Universe was supposed to be. Unfortunately, they allowed that to just deviate too wildly. Now, on the DC Comics side, you have the exact opposite problem. On the DC Comics side, you have everything rebooting all the time. I mean, we didn't even go like a month after the Dark Christ, or what was it? Dark Knight's Death Metal. That rebooted the DC Universe into Infinite Frontier. It was not 4 months after Infinite Frontier hit that they already started laying the groundwork for this Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths garbage that just flooded the shelves. And now you've got a whole new DC Universe. You've got all these new characters with their histories and stuff. And now they're having another event, which is more of an in-universe event called Lazarus Planet. And you're going to wind up with heroes with changed powers and stuff. But you can't go like a month without seeing some new event cropping up. And it just drives me insane because I can't figure out how I'm supposed to care about these characters because they're no longer even characters to me. They're just basically shells into which whichever author just happens to get a hold of these characters after a while can just project their own idiosyncrasies and beliefs into these shells and play with them for a while and wear them like finger puppets, and then, and then it's time for the next event, and who knows who the characters are going to be after that. So the thing is when you've got these characters and you've spread them so thin that now it becomes impossible to get interested in them anymore. What do? Well, either you have to have another slate cleaning event like Crisis on Infinite Earths and, condense everything down into an actual solid timeline again that everybody can relate to and say, this is the official timeline and we're not changing this. And that, I think, was what Dan DiDio was actually going to do with Generations. I think the idea behind that was to create what later became known as the linear verse, but was originally thought of as G5, where you took these heroes and said, okay, well, we're just going to basically have these heroes on this particular Earth, the DC Comics Earth. Let's just say that, heroes live to be 500 years old or something. Or 1,000 years old. Let's just say human beings live to be 1,000 years old, and that way we never really have to change these characters over time. Because even though they will live through all these different eras, like the 50s, 60s, 70s, and on into the future, they'll never age so much that we really have to do anything to them and to make them line up in their histories. You don't have to age Dick Grayson anymore. You don't have to age Tim Drake anymore. You don't have to age Jason Todd to get all the Robins consistent anymore. And that would have been a very interesting idea. I really wish they hadn't booted Dan DiDio out before he could do that. I think that actually would have been something pretty darn interesting. And, maybe the last solid attempt at making a coherent timeline before, the jumbled garbage that we have now, with the Infinite Frontier now going into the multiverse of 52 plus the infinite Earths. And I don't even know how to explain it, and there's no point in trying. Because who knows? They're probably going to reboot the whole damn thing again tomorrow. So anyway, the point is, what if they had taken Stan Lee's ideas? And instead of saying, we're going to make this a new kind of Superman or Batman or Green Lantern or Wonder Woman, etc., etc., What if they had just said, let's partner with Stan Lee and let's build an entire new DC or DC universe that has nothing to do with the DC universe of the mainstays from 1930s. DC could have built for itself an entire new universe that maybe people would have been interested in and could have split their attention between the two universes. And the same thing happened when they did the idea of tangent comics later on, which took other characters like Doom Patrol and the Atom and various other ones, Nightwing, and turned that into a, let's say, what happened if World War III actually did happen in 1962 and you had the Cuban Missile Crisis spill over, and what does that mean for the heroes, et cetera, et cetera. They could have turned that into its own universe and not had to rely on those heroes being pale reflections of the DC universe as it is in the mainstream. What if they had just basically said, let's build a new universe for people to either enjoy or not, and let's commit to it, and let's give it its own history and its own cast of characters. Let's pour our creative energies not into creating another set of derivative characters, not by creating a vampire Batman or a zombie Batman or a zombie Superman or a, elf quest Batman Superman thing, but just create a new slate and a new world and see where that goes. There's so much potential just in that. Or here's another thing. If you really want to bring diversity into the DC universe or into the Marvel universe, just create a whole bunch of new characters. And then get people to be interested in those new characters. Make them good characters and don't have the weight of their identity be their demographic identity. Oh, goodness gracious. So what I'm basically trying to say here is that I'm looking at these volumes put out by DC Comics where they basically said, here's an idea that we've had before, take a derivative off of that, and let's explore that. Do that, Stan Lee, or do that, Tangent Writers, and you don't have to confine yourself that way. You don't have to confine your creativity that way. That's not how the Milestone universe started. Milestone is a great example of the kind of multiversing done right that can exist within the same company, because when Milestone came into existence, it wasn't part of the DC universe proper. It was its own alternate universe, but it had its own base of characters. It had Icon. It didn't have a black Superman. It had Hardware. It didn't have a black Iron Man. It had Static. It didn't have a black Spider-Man. It had its own set of characters that you could latch onto, and which readers like me did latch onto. We were faithful readers of that set. I think I got every Milestone comic there was for the longest time, until the company finally folded. And you can do this, you can accomplish this if you try, but if all you're going to do is just try and make derivative versions of the same DC and Marvel characters and put them out as alternates, all you're doing is diluting your creativity across all of these weak characters. And you're never getting to the strength, you're never getting to the core, you're never getting to the real creativity that goes into building your own universe. And that, whether you like ISOM number 1 or not, that at least is what Eric July is going for in building the Rippaverse. He's not trying to make a character that's derivative off of these other characters, no matter what unintentional parallels you might see. I mean, I know there's that comparison between the Phantom Zone villains from Superman 2, the movie, and his Alpha Core in ISOM number 1. I looked at that and I chuckled because, if you squint hard, you can see the comparison. And it's funny, but, it's not something to be taken seriously. Who are you going to compare Yaira to? I guess you could compare her to Wonder Woman in some way, but I don't know. I mean, if you squint hard, like I said, But yeah, the Rippaverse, whether it succeeds or fails, and right now it's succeeding massively. I mean, you can't really argue with $3.7 million, but that is based more on the strength of his fan appeal as opposed to the quality of the book. We'll see how later iterations of the book, later issues of the book turn out. That is what he's going for, is to create a coherent universe with real created concepts that don't rely on originals that exist somewhere else, where you have to draw some of the meaning from outside of where the characters that you're working with exist. The Rippaverse is self-contained, and it's not going to be a multiverse, and it's not going to have these time travel issues that wind up splitting it off. So, let's see where that goes. But I wish DC and Marvel would take a look at what the Rippaverse is doing, take a look at the fact that people want something like this. They obviously want it. They want it to the tune of $3.7 million. And take that lesson and apply it to their own stuff, instead of continuing to do what they're doing now, which is to basically say, let's Spider-Verse the whole freaking world, let's Infinite Earths the whole freaking world, and let's make all of these multiple repetitive versions of all of these different DC and Marvel heroes, so that you can have 50 different kinds of Superman, and each of them is only really 1/50th as good as any character that's out there. So anyway, I'm going to get back to reading my Stan Lee omnibus, and hopefully that will be an enjoyable experience. But if not, well, there's always trading in. I'm Mike Partika. Thank you for watching. Do subscribe if you haven't already, and I will talk to you later.